And I think of those people who had these amazing dreams and who farmed the beautiful fields in and around the Pinette, Bell River area where I live. So they made an impact, but something happened in 1758 that was going to absolutely destroy that impact and make it as if it had never happened. The Acadian presence became an archaeological phenomenon. And that was because in the wars between Britain and France for the control of North America, the French lost Ile Saint-Jean, the island of St. John, which is the old name for Prince Edward Island, and all the people here were part of the process of ethnic cleansing that took place at that time, where people were loaded in ships and deported, and that was the end of them. You could say that was a terrible, terrible tragedy, and indeed it was. It was in all the places where it happened in the Maritimes, at Fort Beausejour, Fort Lawrence, at Grand Pre. Similar vast numbers of people were taken away, their lives destroyed, and the land that they had claimed from the wilderness very, very quickly, as we know, takes no time at all, began to grow up again in saplings. What did happen was that the British government attached itself to the idea that the island would be a fantastic way to pay off debts to various wealthy individuals in the UK, people who had lent the British Crown money in order to carry on the war against the French in North America. There were incredible outstanding bills. And so it was suggested that the island be surveyed into as many lots or sections of land of 20,000 acres as possible. And there would be a lottery, and all these people who were owed money by King George III could come and pick up a number out of the hat, and that number meant that they now owned 20,000 acres here in PEI. And the person who did the survey was Captain Samuel Holland, and next year will be the 250th anniversary of that survey. He worked coming from various directions with several crews, working as well in the winter when everything was covered with snow. And he produced a map that you see in the upper right-hand picture over there that is 19 feet long when you unroll it. It's in the British Archives at Kew. It's made up of the biggest sheets of paper that they could manufacture at that time, all glued together. And Holland made 3 of these. And he drew by hand every scrap of knowledge about the geography of the island, every trace left by the Acadians, down to little specks where their houses were, their windmills were, their churches were, sometimes where their fields were. He put it all on that 19-foot strip of paper, and now only one survives. It is perhaps for Prince Edward Island the most precious artifact there is in the whole world. The most precious. Why? Because in doing what he did, Holland accomplished several unusual things. First of all, for the first time in the history of mapping, it was possible to record your coordinates both from latitude, which had always been easy, but longitude had not been easy. And unless you get accurate readings for both latitude and longitude, you cannot get areas of land to look the way they actually look. They will always be distorted, something will be wrong. A clock had been invented which was portable and permitted astronomers, surveyors all over the world to take readings and combine that mathematics together and make a new chart. And so the map that Holland made of PEI, which you will see shortly, is one of the great moments in the history of mapping, because PEI was one of the first places to be mapped using the new surveying technology. And for the first time, it looked then the way it looks today. This little detail that you see over there shows you the close-up at Pinet, where Pinet village is, and where all the little spots are, where the houses are. And you can go all over this huge map and look and say, oh my God, there's a village here. Is it built up? Is it in a built-up area? Oh shit, it is. Too bad. And then you find another one over here. No, it's not built up. And the possibility for archaeology is absolutely fantastic. In 1775, this map was produced for general circulation. And it shows the island divided into the three counties, Prince, Queens, and Kings. And the reason they are divided so oddly, in case you ever wondered, you'd expect Prince County to end at Summerside, and you'd expect Queens County to end at Morel, because that's where everything is squeezed. But they had 67 lots, and they tried to divide them into thirds. And so that's why you have the three counties, the three county capitals. And you can see that the lots were all made except for one landlocked one, lot 67, where all kinds of desperate Irish went to, but where there is some quite beautiful farmland. All the lots were designed so that people didn't need roads in the early days of settlement. They could settle along the coastline, they could settle along the rivers and bays that went inside. And so in drawing up those 20,000 acre lots and arranging them that all but one would have access to water for transportation was a stroke of genius, but it was done. In effect, what Samuel Holland did was to create an artifact, because every square inch of land was accounted for. Every square inch of land was owned by the people you see on the little list that's printed up there in the top center of the map. And as time went on and the rest of Canada was developed and surveyed and settled, and there was growth, PEI remained unique as the only province or territory of Canada that isn't just a province. It is an artifact. What is an artifact? An artifact is something made by human hands, usually made with love and made with skill. And this is how PEI was made. So I think the fact that geographically we are a province and an artifact is almost as important, relatively speaking, in the scheme of things, as Anne of Green Gables. We are unique internationally. Does anyone on the island know this? Is this ever taught in any school? Maybe you know. But this is the first beautiful map made of the island that, for public consumption, that represented the island as we know it today. And those people who won the lotteries, the lot owners, the landlords, were supposed to start settling founding towns, parishes, in all of these lots right away, but of course they didn't. Samuel Holland, for example, wrote about Lot 1 up here, where I spent my childhood with my grandparents. He said, it's really crappy, it's worthless, it's not good for anything. So can you imagine the poor British nobleman in London on that fateful lottery day picking up number 1 and saying, oh shit, because Holland had published a little booklet that described what every lot was like. So you knew what you were getting. You just had to flip and say, oh, I'm so happy, this is so wonderful. The fact is, the reality is that hardly anybody did any development, and there was a very, very long process that started in revolutions in the 1840s. Someone was killed in Belfast, quite close to where I live, over this question of getting rid of those absentee landlords and having the right to buy your land. And it wasn't until the 1870s that the process was completed. And then things could really go, people could then really own their land. Here, it was the landlords who owned vast estates, and all the farms, and there were hundreds of them, keen farmers who came from Britain, settled there, and they themselves, with their labor and their skills, made the farms. They did not own the farms. They had to make them perfect. They had to get all the harvest, animal and plant that they could from it, and they got in return almost nothing. And that's how the first years of the island as a British colony existed. Here you can see the list of the first owners, and you can see close up how lots 2, 3, and 4 have all been carefully arranged and surveyed. They're still geometric, but they provide access along to the sea for transportation, and it was understood that later on roads would go inland. Now, here is another map that was made 105 years after Captain Holland's map in 1880. And it was done by James Meacham. I'll tell you about that incredibly important atlas in a moment. You can now see that railroads, those heavy dark lines, go from one end of the island to another. You can see that not only are there towns and villages along the edge of the water, but there are lots of towns and villages inland as well, and everywhere you look, often following the lot lines or parallel to them, you see that there are roads. In 105 years, the island was exploited agriculturally with a tremendous speeding up of things when it became possible for the farmers to actually own the land that they were farming. And then there was an incredible burst of energy, but we had reached the 1870s, the 1880s, when in this country and around the world, there was an incredible burst of energy because of new technology for farming, for transportation, for all sorts of things. Meacham's atlas, and I went on and on and on three different lectures last year. It took me that long to say what I wanted to say about it. Meacham's atlas was published in 1880 and represents an astonishing, the most astonishing publishing venture ever done on this island. What did it involve? Well, it involved someone who was experienced at doing this sort of thing, which had, by 1880, become a popular thing to do all through the United States and in some areas of Canada. How did he do his atlas because for those of you who know it, I don't have to say this, but many of you may not know Meacham's Atlas, you may not have gone through it. He has taken and surveyed in such detail all 67 lots, and they're given great big folio pages. And not only are the lot lines there, but all the individual property lines are there, and the houses that are on those properties, and the names of the owners, and exactly how many acres they own. This is all on this atlas. How did he do it? And it was so accurate that until aerial photography took over in the mid-1960s, when you went to the government map office in Charlottetown to argue about property lines and property divisions, they had two original Meacham's atlases cut apart and glued onto a huge wall, because it took a huge wall, and that's where the mappers went, and they'd say, you're wrong, Meacham says this. In 1960 I had that experience. You're wrong, Meacham, 1880, says this. This is how accurate it was. What did they do? They surveyed. They had to hire a crew, send them all over the island, using various methods of the most accurate being the chain. They had also one that did rough surveying, an odometer that you pushed on a wheel. And then Meacham's is full of the most amazing pictures of properties and farms all over the island, over 130 of them, as well as all the maps. They had never ever really been mined as a source of information about the evolution of farming and architecture and all sorts of other things on the island. For the pictures that were put in Meacham, they could have sent around a photographer. But they didn't want to send around a photographer because the farms were in the process of becoming. Maybe the photographer would arrive there the day when the best view of the house was blocked by a gigantic manure pile. And you weren't going to pay money to have that published in an atlas that was published in Philadelphia. So rather than take photographs, there were skilled artists, at least 3 of them, who went around the island with the drawing material, sat on the chair, and this is from another thing that I found in a federal publication. There's the farmer leaning over the artist's back and telling him, now tidy that up. Make that tree look older. I just planted it this year. Make it look 25 years old. You can just imagine, blah, 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 giving instructions. That's what you do when your farm is being immortalized. These drawings were then shipped to Philadelphia, where they were drawn on pieces of limestone for reproduction through the art process called lithography. Lithography means to write on stone in Greek. And they drew these pictures on stone and with a grease pencil, and which was attractive to ink, and they could run off thousands of perfect copies without the quality of the image never being destroyed. And there you see them in a lithography shop, taking the original drawing, converting it to stone. Here a man is cleaning and preparing stones, and there's the press. So if you own an original Meacham's Atlas, every one of those pages, those maps, those pictures, is an original work of art done by hand, and then folded and sewn by hand inside the great big book. Incredible. You have no idea of the labor. And I'm going on and on about this at this time, when I don't have much time, just to make you appreciate that the greatest document of the evolution of farms, farm buildings of varying kinds, farm equipment, but most critically, the way the land was cleared and divided and used and fenced, and how other things like lumber were taken from the land, as well as whatever you got from farming. All of those things are in the atlas. Here at the very top is lot 1, as drawn by Holland in 1765. Here is Lot 1, and Lot 1 is remote. I've been back on the island since 1981, and I've hardly met a person who has had the courage to go on the pilgrimage to Lot 1. It's so far away and it's so remote. It's, how many of you have been to Lot 1? You're farmers. You understand land and you understand the necessity of traveling. But you can see by 1880, all the land is there, including my mother's ancestors. Their label, their house is there, their acreage is there. And we have 100 years after the British colony was founded, and then we can look back about 100 years from where we are today. So it's a midpoint, and it's so incredibly valuable in order to understand how the island has been exploited. Here are a number of those little illustrations. Some of them are just that big, some of them are half a page. But the farmers paid money for the artist to come and sit down and make a sketch. I wonder if the sketch was made from a boat. And to show their farm looking as good as it possibly could. And this is typical of the first farms that would have been built by our ancestors, our British ancestors here on the island. A small little central plan house, possible central chimney, right next to the edge of the water, and with a path leading to the barns, and still an awful lot of forest behind. There they are probably spending more time fishing than they are clearing the land, and that's why they're not bragging about all the land that they have cleared. But some of the other farmers we can see in these illustrations have moved. Sorry about this, I'm not used to this kind of clicker, and my old hands are shaking, so I'm doing the wrong things. Some of them move inland, like Mr. McRae in Wheaton River in Lot 24, and you can see here's the road. You can see different kinds of fences, 3 right away that you can see, fence designs that they were using at that time. He still has the earliest, simplest kind of house, the small, tiny central chimney house, which was generally the first house of the settlers. But you can see that there are nice outbuildings that are happening. There isn't an awful lot of cleared land, and the wild forests, which could well be virgin forest because it's inland, the forests are creeping down towards the house. But this is how it all started. This is how the miracle that is PEI started. With the passage of time, and with the hands necessary to do the work, like this New London property, you can see that the house has now become more sophisticated. It's an 1850s design of house with a center gable. It was the height of fashion at that time. And you can see that the forests are receding, and there are lovely big hillsides covered with fields. And also, the trains have made it possible to distribute all over the island these new forms of mechanized farming equipment that were just at that time becoming popular. And so if they had it, you can imagine, they told the artist, make sure when they're cutting the grain that you get a sketch of the machinery there. And so you can see in these pictures, and I'm only showing you 4 of them, just how you, the farmers, took this island that really wasn't terribly attractive. And when you come down to it, the island, just by itself, without the hand of the farmer being visible, is just another green place. Sure, there are some nice strips of coastline, some nice cliffs here and there, But the island untouched by the farmer was what you see up here, mixed forest. And you can see this farmer had money. In fact, several of them must have pitched in together because there are several farms. They got the biggest picture possible. And you can see they are so pleased with progress that they don't mind the train going through their front yard. And they put the train there. We live next to the train. When we travel, we don't go to the station. The train stops at our house. We just have to be there. Brag, brag, brag. And so there it is, going over a trestle. And here, more farm machinery of different kinds. And you can see the forest, the massive forest is pushing back. But there are cutting operations that you can see up there. And down below here, a sawmill with lots of beautifully cut lumber. So you're able to study how not only the farmers took over the land and made it produce, but how they began to exploit it and produce something vital like timber for themselves. So it's a special thing to see.
Where are we talking, right?
That one in Lot 21, it was the property of James Elliott, and a friend of mine tells me that several of those buildings are still standing, although a number were destroyed when there was an explosion and a fire some years ago. But the landscape is still there. Yes?
The house on the right hand side is our family.
Your house?
Your family owns it?
Cool. It's Ryan's house.
This is a marvelous moment because I'm just talking here about something in old, dirty, smelly, musty books. But all of a sudden, there's somebody in this room who can say, yes, we own that.
Where is that here? Pleasant Valley? Pleasant Valley.
That's interesting.
A lecture that I gave in the past was, I took houses that were in Meacham's Atlas, and I went to check out if they were still standing today, and I showed them side by side. It's a marvelous experience. It's a wonderful feeling for me when I'm going on and on in one of my lectures, as I tend to do, that somebody will interrupt me and say, I live there. It reinforces everything that I think is truly special about PEI. And so, in these ways that are first documented to us extensively and in amazing detail in Meacham's Atlas, we start to have the island that we know today. And people drive along and they see something like this, and sometimes they're so overcome, as I am, happens frequently. I have to stop, pull over to the side of the road, and get out and look, because it is just so beautiful. Many people who are from cities stop and look and say, it is so very beautiful. I have a slight edge on them. I never cleared land, but I saw it being done, and I formed my first impressions of the world in a landscape like this. And it is an inherent part of me. Nothing can ever take it away. In my lifetime, I have traveled to European cities to see the art that I was teaching in my courses in school and university, and I saw works of art that my knees gave out. But when I compare it to the feelings that I get at seeing the PEI landscape, there is no difference at all between seeing a great work of art and seeing the beauty of the island landscape, which represents the work of farmers and farmers alone. It is the farmers who have made the PEI artifact, the unique PEI artifact. It is the farmers who have not only put the icing on the cake, but have really revealed to the world that a cake is there to put icing on in the form of their crops. It is a truly special thing to be living in PEI. And all the lines that you see there, if you go back to the original maps and you trace them back, they are all parallel to the lines Samuel Holland and his surveyors drew in 1764-65 to the north, the magnetic north of that time. So all of these lines are parallel to the lines of Holland. They're not something that we invented. Even special buildings like our churches are given dignity and a sense of belonging and deep, deep meaning in community because they are surrounded by farmland. A city in a church surrounded by city blocks. A church in a city surrounded by city blocks. And a church in the country surrounded by fields are there for the same purpose. But I assure you that the feeling you get of the unique place of worship in a community can best be appreciated in the middle of farmland, not in the middle of city blocks. In 1816, an extraordinary painter in England called John Constable did this picture of a country house and a farm for one of his clients. It had not started that way. There was a rage among the multimillionaire landowners of England to change the landscape to make it look like a perfect picture. And the owners of Wivenhoe Park in Essex did all of that, planted rows of trees, changed the course of the river, and this is where they lived. You can barely see their house, their brick house behind the grove of trees. It shows the perfect Arcadian, idyllic world of the English dream. When I go home from Charlottetown, as I will be going in several minutes, when I come to Orwell, I will turn right and I will look, and this is what I won't see at this time of year, but I'll be seeing it this summer. It is just like Constable's painting. And who did it? Samuel Holland, who drew what the artifact should be, and the farmers who within those lines established lives for themselves and their descendants and created the beautiful, lovingly made artifact on which we live. Thanks so much.
I'll entertain a couple of questions for Mr. Porter, if anybody has it at this time.
As usual, I've gone over time.
There, please.
If you, in the 1881 atlas, if your names there and the houses and that, how do you go back beyond that to trace who might have built that home or?
This is where you start doing land searches. You go to the Island Registry Office and you do searches. You read community histories and parish histories, of which many have now been written, and you generally got the family history in those little histories. Sometimes you think they're not much, but they'll contain the history, and they'll actually give you the date. You know, that house was constructed in 1832, and sure enough, the style matches. So there are different ways of going back like that.
Thank you, Brian. Is anybody else, please? Yes, please.
I'll just relate a little anecdotal story. I lived in Lot 18 for most of my life here, and at the end of our road was, I guess the name was Lieutenant Robert Stewart. You probably know where that homestead was. Anyway, that home was torn down around 1986, 1990, and around then. And I happened to be in that home upstairs, and in the wall was a hand-drawn copy of one of James Holland's maps of Lot 18. So
He would have
the
gotten
history's
that.
in the walls.
He would have gotten that from the surveyor's office in Charlottetown, and every farm would have had one of those at some point, and hardly any survived. But you saw one.
Well, it's in the museum in Princetown.
Good. Best place for it.
Is there anybody else, please?
Mr. Porter, do you have any idea why they give lot number one? why do you start on that wetlands?
Well, they had that great big 19-foot-long map made on trestle tables, and it was the numbering of the lots on the Holland map are odd, because you expect, number 1 on the left and 67 up in Surrey. Doesn't work that way. It's when the surveying crews brought in their data to be joined together to the other data, those who had started with number 1, 2, and 3, they went, to 15 or so, and then somebody else took over, and the order on the paper was broken. That's what happened.
Thank you. You carry very well number 1. That's what your former ancestor land.
Yes.
So you are the number 1 as a historian. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thank you very much, then.
Thank you very much, Reg. As I listened to your presentation, I said to Reg just as it came up, I said, I've heard your name on several occasions. I just haven't had the privilege of meeting you. I don't know what I would suggest other than to say that you are an island treasure. It's wonderful. There's nothing better than to have somebody that can give you a solid and a great reason to feel better about your country or your province or yourself. And that's what you have done today.
Yeah.
You have said to all of us that we sit on a place here in Prince Edward Island that I have said, if you think it's beautiful, just keep it to yourself. There's no need of spreading the word and getting everybody here. And there's a little bit of truth in that, because we do have a beautiful place. But I thought your analogy that you drew about traveling to exotic and wonderful places to see things of beauty, you now have given me a greater appreciation for the things that are actually all around me, and I don't really take the time to spend the time to appreciate what I've got. So thank you for making me feel better. And maybe Lucy Modest and the Green Gables has gone down a little bit. Just a little bit.
I'm happy.
Thank you. So now next, one more thing. The other thing, Reg, is that now that you got me in such a spiritual mood, they say confession is good for the soul.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I might as well get my confession over with now. What we're doing is that we had planned on and had given an obligation to an individual, which was myself, to get little gifts for everybody who was the presenter today. I completely forgot. So you will get something via mail sometime. That's good. Now I feel better. Okay, next we're going to have Phil come forward, and the council had heard of the province putting together a trade delegation that was going to be going to the country of Taiwan. As you know, there's a number of monks who are now living on Prince Edward Island and are establishing a relationship here agriculturally. They are owning land, and there are people who are farming to grow products that they indeed have every intent on marketing back in Taiwan. The monk religious organization owns a number of Sobeys type stores, or what I would call retail outlets in the country of Taiwan, and they're a large population, although they're many, many miles away. The question was asked around the adapt table, does anyone find that they have time to go to Taiwan to see just exactly, we are producing more soybeans and other things here in Prince Edward Island now, that there indeed is a market for in that country. Anyway, there was none of the individual directors able to make that trip or to take the time and go, so we asked Phil if he would go and represent us. So Phil is going to give a report on the trip to Taiwan. I don't know whether the province will be doing one at a later date, but this is going to be the first one, as far as I know, Phil, that has been given that will give the people who, like myself, was not able to attend that, an indication of what you see. Phil, please.
Thank you, Honor. Well, I hope I can do as good a job in terms of keeping your attention as Rich did. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Rich. Also, I just want to quickly give some recognition to the Women's Institute that provided the snacks today and the orange lunchbox, which provided a fabulous lunch. And there's, you know, Chef James does this all the time. He produces way too much food. So there's enough food out there, it doesn't look like anybody's eaten yet. So please help yourselves on the way out. Okay. There's a number of us in the room actually that attended the trade mission to Taiwan. So I'd like to just recognize them first. First off, Susan McKinnon is in the back. Susan deserves a lot of credit for having put it together and facilitated a lot of the activities while we were en route. So thank you, Susan. Garth and Alan Miller, Garth Wilkie and Alan Miller, you guys were here for the cranberry growers, and Margaret and Alexander Beatty, you met Alex earlier today for their Alpha Farms, and Nancy Willis, who represented PEI berries. And Tyson was here earlier, but he had to leave for another meeting. So, as Albert mentioned, there's a existing and expanding Buddhist community presence on the island, and they have relationships, or well, they come from Taiwan, and they have relationships there, and so with the growing amount of exports that have been occurring as a result of this, this trade mission was put together, and this gives you an aerial view of what Taipei looks like. That tall building is called the 101. It's one of the tallest buildings in the world. Just a few facts about Taiwan. It's roughly 6 times the size of PEI and has a little bit less than the total population of Prince Edward Island, of all of Canada. So it's a pretty crowded place. Every time we thought we were leaving one city to go out into the country, we entered another huge city. It was really rather amazing. It's a subtropical and tropical environment, although we had a hard time believing that when we were there. It rained every day, and it was kind of cool. It wasn't snow, but it was not like we had expected. And it's about, oh, I'm sorry, that's a misprint there. It's actually at 35% Buddhism, not 5%. So the major religion in the country is Buddhist. And it's a very thriving economy. It's a steady growth and nearly full employment. It seems like everyone works. Actually, a lot of people I was talking to had 2 jobs. It's one of the largest economies in Asia and a very important trading partner for Canada, and actually an increasingly important trading partner for Prince Edward Island. If you see the last bullet, actually Prince Edward Island was the fastest growing provincial exporter to Taiwan over the last few years. So when I travel, usually the first place I go to is the farmer's market to see what it's really like. And so the first night Nancy and I got there, we headed out and we went to the night market. And these are little markets. Now, this by no means a depiction of what Taiwan is like, but it's always like the farmer's market. It's a place where it's just kind of fun to be. Anyway, these little markets exist throughout the city. This one was about 4 or 5 blocks long and shows all sorts of great booths with fresh food, meat, fish, vegetables. And you could pick up whatever you wanted here. And just like even more so than the farmers markets here, they were just really extensive and easy to barter and dicker with and get what you were looking for. This gives you an idea of what the stores are really like. They're beautiful, beautiful shops that we visited. The one at the top right, City Super, because it's such a crowded place. This was like 3 or 4, maybe even 5 stories underground, and then it was a huge store. And On the bottom right, you'll see some pictures on the inside of Fresh One next. But what really impressed me was this was the sign at the entrance, which talked about enjoyment, knowledge, quality, sharing, and variety. I thought that really set the tone, I thought, for a lot of their retail messaging that they express to their clients. And this other one, the Organic Chateau, was not a store that we visited. It wasn't part of the Les Zen group, which I'll explain in a minute. But I just was able to capture this on the, well, we were stopped at a light, actually. But it was very typical, I think, of the messaging that they were talking about. And this is balancing the purity of the great earth. Organic Chateau attempts to recreate the perfect balance of our body, mind, and soul through the magnificence of basic, simple food of the great earth. Returning the purest form of the natural food is embracing the basis of sustainable life forms. This is the inside of Fresh One. Now this was not a typical scene of the grocery stores, but I thought it was really pretty cool. It was an aquaponic system as soon as you walked in the door. So there are these trays of hydroponically grown herbs and produce and koi growing in the tank below. Some of you might be familiar with the system I've got that Nancy and I have at our house, but it's very similar to this, where the dirty water from the fish feeds the plants, and the plants clean the water for the fish. So it's a completely cycling system, and the only additive to the system is water. Right behind that wall was a cooking class going on. And you can see that there's a couple of chefs there and a room full of people learning how to cook some of these fresh foods that they're able to pick right from their own garden. This was actually one of the fewest and certainly the largest display of dairy products, milk products that I saw. And it was Organic Valley, comes from an organic co-op in Wisconsin. There's virtually no dairy industry to speak of in Taiwan, and so they use a lot of other products, which I'll talk about in a moment. And that little tray there with potatoes, I don't know if others saw any display of potatoes, but that's the only one I noticed. And you can see that, not a real big product. They're not big potato eaters. This is what they drink instead of milk, is powdered protein drinks. So you can see there's a 5-grain powder, which includes rice, black bean, black soybean, and usually oats, I think. And then they have an organic oat powder, soybean powder milk, black bean powder, et cetera, et cetera. We saw large displays of this in just about every grocery store that we were in. Yeah, well, they were served to us throughout the trip, and they're good. Takes some getting used to, like soy milk or almond milk does, you know. And they come bottled as well. So the first full night of the event, there was very nice reception. This is the president of Holland College and the president of UPEI signing a memorandum of understanding with the head education delegates from Taiwan, a memorandum of understanding so that we could develop negotiations for trading students back and forth between UPEI and Holland College and Taiwan. So the second full day of the tour was Canada Food Day. And this was a big event. They really went out for this, and the Les Zen group, which is their logo on the top right of there, put up this sign. This was all Canadian products. Here you see PEI Juice Works and PEI Berries products. These are some other Canadian products, and PEI Cranberries in there somewhere as well. That's on the bottom right-hand corner. That's a woman named Catherine. She's Canada's ambassador to Taiwan. And this is another part of the store. There's Garth with the premier. And this was actually a good example of a fairly large display of produce, fresh produce. I didn't see a whole lot of fresh produce in the stores. It was mostly processed stuff like I showed you in the cans. And even the cooler back there has powdered bean drinks in it rather than milk and yogurt kind of things. This is the organic black bean powder drink. And it's a different black bean than what we might be used to growing. If you've grown black beans before, you know that they actually have black beans are a really nice bean to grow in the Maritimes because they actually mature earlier than soybean. They use a different variety. It's a green kernel bean. So ever since I got back, I've been in contact with some of our hosts, and they're working on getting me some seed, and we're planning to do some field trials in the legacy garden to see if we could grow the type of bean that they like here in PEI. And then in the top right corner, there's some bottles of juices. That's the orange bottle there is a carrot juice. And we went to the factory where that is made, and I'll talk about that in a minute when we get there. But these are some of the trends to watch in Taiwan.